see how we get to. How are we doing? Okay, give it a few more minutes. Give it a few more minutes. Still people in the waiting room. As I said, just for people who are still joining, we really recommend that you use Speak of You for this afternoon's State of Resilience event. Okay, so welcome again. Still a few people joining, but we shall probably get going. So yeah, welcome to the State of Us 2021, State of Resilience. So my name is Ed Whitelaw. I am from the Real Ideas organisation based here in Plymouth and across the southwest, and indeed further afield. And I have the great joy and pleasure of being your co-host and co-chair, my colleague down the road, Francis. Francis, who are you? Where are you from?
Hi, Ed. Hi, everybody. So I'm Francis Northrop. I work for the New Economics Foundation, where I lead on our local economies work. And it's really good to be with you again this week. Very warm welcome to this third session of the State of Us, which is kindly supported by Power to Change. So this one's exploring the state of resilience, so making and production, and where we're going to explore how we can ensure sustainability is at the heart of the struggle for autonomy and how community enterprises and initiatives are making this happen, both here in the UK and around the world. And to do that, I'm delighted to welcome our speakers today. So first up, we've got Hannah Harris from Plymouth Culture and Fab City Plymouth, and then Mona Barney from the May Project Gardens in London, Jane Hembrow and Susan Moores from Plymouth Scrap Store CIC, and then joining us all the way from Indonesia, we have Thomas Diaz from Fab Lab Barcelona and the International Fab City Network. So good evening to you, Thomas.
Fantastic. Thank you, Francis, and thank you to all our speakers being here from so far away in some cases. So before we go on, the usual bit of etiquette and a bit of instruction about what we're going to do this afternoon. So I've already dropped the agenda into the chat, and as per the preceding events, today is kind of split into two parts. Initially, we'll hear from our speakers. We'll then have a chance for a bit of discussion amongst ourselves in the breakouts, followed by a bit of a Q&A with our speakers. We will be recording the event today as a record, and that will include recording in the breakouts as well. The hashtag for the event you will see in the chat, which is the State of Us 2021. Please do make use of that and build movement. You'll notice that you're all on mute. We will, of course, unmute you for the breakout rooms because we want to hear from you all. The State of Us is very much about making connections. So if you're happy, please introduce yourself by dropping your name into the chat. And also do mention where you're from. And if you're happy, also drop in your email to share if you'd like to do so as well. So we do want you to ask questions. Please do ask questions of our speakers. You can do this by dropping them in the chat, and we'll put as many as we can to our speakers when we can. We will aim to have a quick sort of moment of clarification questions after our speakers have presented. So please do drop your questions in the chat. There will be then time for further discussion of ideas and questions in the breakout rooms, which we can then put to our speakers more fully in the Q&A discussions. My dear speakers, you of course have the power to unmute yourselves, but of course, please only do this to present or to address a specific question. So today, the State of Resilience is the third installment of the four-part State of Us conference series. And we've already had a really fantastic set of events so far. We started with the State of Work, where we saw how people are creating power both within and beyond the workplace, realizing key new municipalist ideas of creating economic fairness, power, and everyday democracy through social enterprises, new unions, and cooperatives. We then traveled all the way to the state of spaces and places and took these ideas further and discovered some great examples of dual power, how communities are driving change by working both within, beyond, and against the state. On one hand, occupying our public institutions for the better, and on the other, building new networks and partnerships of power. So today, we turn our attention arguably to the biggest issue of the day, climate emergency and ecological breakdown. Welcome to the State of Resilience, how communities are not only necessarily finding their own solutions to combating environmental disaster, but are also at the same time creating economic power for communities, defying the idea of the false choice between a social economy, economic fairness and greater equality, and a regenerative economy, an economy that cares for and restores the environment. Today we'll build on these ideas, on the ideas of the politics of proximity and everyday democracy and dual power, and bring into focus another common new municipalist idea, the idea of translocal action globalism or cosmo-localism? How are we not only acting independently in our own localities, but also forming regional, national and international networks of change and resilience beyond the state, critical when considering environmental action? So Francis, the idea of creating powerful communities and economic democracy through building environmental resilience is a bit, I suppose, a bit more tricky for me. Is it that we just need powerful communities to create the necessary level of environmental action, or can we also build power through taking environmental action? Help me out here.
Okay, big question, Ed. What was the thing you just called it?
Cosmo-localism.
Cosmo-localism. Okay, I'm wondering, did you coin that?
No, I didn't. I think that's one of our friends. I think that's our friends at the Alternative UK.
Okay, I quite like it, but yeah. So I think a lot of the focus of these sessions has really been on how, like, municipalism has been defined as only what local authorities or anchor institutions can do, rather than it actually being municipal level, which actually in the real sort of translation just means locally. And so Ed, as Ed just sort of referred to, this idea that you can organise horizontally, but you can also organise kind of across international boundaries. So it's about acting in solidarity with other people. And then how this idea of sort of how you build resilience has become hooked into kind of like, is it just corporations with their CSR policies or, you know, ESG goals? And is it, you know, attracting kind of like green technology through inward investment and things, rather than the actual opportunities that exist on the ground? And all the people who will be speaking today, and a lot of you in the room and other people, know that environmentalism, when you're working on a project, it doesn't stand alongside, it's not in the way that it is for big corporations. They don't think about the environment. But actually, when you're down at the level that we're at, then you're really actively thinking about the culture and the environment that you're in, just actually the place, and then the sort of broader sort of nature and the, you know, how you kind of work with nature and reuse and all that kind of thing. So that's hopefully what we're going to be able to talk more about this afternoon. So I think without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Hannah, our first speaker.
Great, thank you very much. Let me bring up my presentation. Great, so thank you so much for having me today. So I'm my presentation is talking about the culture plan that we've just launched very recently in Plymouth. It's a 10-year culture plan for the city, and just understanding the relationship between culture and power, and the, you know, kind of connection to the conversation today. It is a 10-year kind of strategic strategy and document. So I think what's really positive is it crosses over into the conference conversations that have been had over the last few weeks as well. So I'll touch upon that, but then focus on the kind of climate emergency question as well. So just by way of an overview, the culture strategy has a number of different ambitions, but we have agreed on these 3 key drivers, and really these are kind of lenses through which we would consider every action, project, initiative, organisation, and those sit within community, environment and the inclusive economy. And these were really strong consensus on these across all of the consultation that we did about the culture plan. And actually the real challenge in writing a culture plan was, how does it not just become a city plan? Because it was so hard to divorce culture from any other conversation, and so we kind of arrived at this because we felt it important not to do that actually this isn't a sector strategy. This is not about how the creative and cultural industries operate. This is, in addition to that, how culture, creativity are used, cited, developed within the city and across our communities by way of empowering change. So it's kind of very broad overview of what we mean by culture. And as a result, we kind of have these real headline drivers that guide the strategy and will guide the implementation plan. And building off the back of that, we looked at how we would deliver. So the approach that we have taken is to focus on 3 key areas. So space and place being one of them, which obviously was a discussion that was had last week. Really amazing local projects as well as international and national connections that the city has. The sector itself, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then people and our communities. So again, trying to make sure these things are not seen in isolation, but are all part of how we move forward that 10-year culture plan. When we look at that question of the environment and that key driver, I think within the cultural sector and certainly within the plan, we've kind of looked at 3 focal points of what we mean by that within the strategy. So I guess the first is that as artists, creatives, practitioners, cultural organisations, we are often early adopters. So you will have seen many organisations putting out climate emergency declarations, really understanding that something needs to be done and really driving that agenda. So we see kind of individual action from artists and cultural organisations. Then we kind of scale it up again and look at how, as a sector, we could have green credentials within the city. So our large events, for example, our festivals, our kind of outdoor space activities, the spectacle that we bring to the city and we produce within the city, what's the credentials of those? How are we making sure that everything we're putting into the public domain in the field of arts and culture kind of has an overarching commitment to making sure that it's low or net impact? And then I guess the area I'd like to focus on is really around the power of creativity. So actually, this is not just the individual action of artists or cultural organisations, but it's how creativity drives social action at a local and global level. And there's something just incredibly powerful about the way arts and culture can engage people, it can challenge people, it can open up conversation on really very, very difficult topics in a way that allows people to talk and question and hopefully take action. And I think that's really within our culture plan what we're talking about. It's not just about policy and strategy, it's about how we use culture and the creativity in everyone to drive positive change and to feel empowered to do so. And I've just included a quote here from Coventry's City of Culture Trust, who have recently received funding for their Green Future programme. And really, they are basically saying, well, why on earth would the climate emergency not be part of a year of culture? Because they are just so intrinsically linked. And there's a couple of points that they make about culture and the environment coming together. The fact that actually it might be the only way that we get proper citizen engagement. And the fact that policy and papers are fine, but actually it's about making people aware and empowering them to make change that's going to be the most significant transformation. So we're seeing other cities, other partners across the UK and globally, really understanding that culture, the environment, climate emergency are not separate conversations, they're one and the same, and that applies to both policy and citizen level. So something that we have been working on within Plymouth and that sits within this plan very, very centrally is the Fab City concept. So within, in 2019, Plymouth joined the Fab City movement. And this is really looking at how, rather than kind of product in, materials in and trash out, how we start to move data around rather than product to materials. So we reduce waste, we empower local activity to happen, we keep that sort of circular motion happening, but actually we are still connected globally. So the important thing here is that it's a movement, it's not a policy, it's not a programme, a product, it's a movement that allows localities to really interpret and to build on what they have, but with some core principles. And so that what we signed up to as a city in 2019 was the kind of Fab City manifesto. So ultimately that by 2054 we will produce all that we consume as a city, which is of course hugely ambitious, but that within that there are different strands of activity, and I think that's what's really interesting about the Fab City's full stack model, and something that I think, looping us back to the culture plan, is something that I'm very passionate about, and I think the State of Us has really considered is at what point do we work with the state? At what point do we challenge the state? Is that within and alongside? And I think something around Fab City really embodies the fact that this needs to happen at every level within a city. And I think the culture plan tries to take that stance as well, that it's about individual action of organisations, of citizens, as well as kind of policy level and strategy level. And so for me, the question that we're asking ourselves around the state of us is really, where does that allyship sit within the state, alongside the state, outside of the state? At what point do we push and pull those key players and partners to make sure that action happens, challenge takes place, but that actually it's not one or the other. It is not all about what happens at policy level, nor is it all about what happens in a kind of DIY culture. There's something that happens in the middle that makes that possible. And that fundamentally, if we don't have allies sitting within organisations and corporate structures, then the change won't happen in that place either. Oh, wrong one. There we go. So we very much joined the Fab City movement because we felt we were already a Fab City. This was not a kind of pie in the sky. It was aspirational, but it was rooted within Plymouth, which is that we already have, and these are just some of them, amazing organisations and facilities that sit within the city, individual projects and artists and creatives, organisations, you know, kind of collectives. And all of this already sits within Plymouth. And when layered onto a city that has social enterprise status and has done a huge amount of work in terms of building a different kind of economy, a different kind of socially active communities, we felt very strongly that the Fab City movement was an opportunity to connect globally and to really kind of umbrella what we have within the city and make some sense of it, so that we were all driving towards that kind of core manifesto. So we are still making sense of this. I think Ed would acknowledge that as well, kind of what Fab City means to us in Plymouth. But I think fundamentally, what I wanted to flag today was the assets the city already has at every level. The fact that culture for me is very much the driving force and connector behind these conversations, and something that would power people's ability to get involved, but also to take forward the ideas and imagine what those products and services might look like that would help resolve some of these global challenges that we have. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there just as a bit of a framing kind of presentation about where we are as a city and what we're hoping to take forward as some of our initiatives as well. Let me stop sharing.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hannah. That was really great. And I really love the idea of culture and the sort of micro-social sort of factors in its sense is a real key driver of behaviour, and it's something we really saw in the state of work earlier on. Also, the idea that sort of creativity is at the heart of change, and almost this idea that sort of art is an extension of communication, but by other means, to sort of have a conversation about some of those complex issues. And we're really excited and looking forward to making Plymouth Fab City a real thing in the not too distant future. Frances, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, and thanks, Hannah. That really was interesting. I'm just reflecting on what you were talking about, working with Bradford at the moment on their City of Culture bid, and how that's connecting and building on Coventry's experience and Hull's experience before that. So every time it feels like they're taking more and more back into kind of community wealth building approach, rather than just have it happen and then disappear again, which I think is fascinating. So now I'm really, really pleased to be able to invite Mona to come and talk to us from May Project Gardens in London. So something really, really grounded, but really, really inspirational. Mona.
Let's hope so, Frances. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having us. Yeah, so actually following on slightly from what Hannah was saying as well about creativity and culture. So we are a grassroots organisation in South London, on sort of the edges of London in Morden, for anybody who is aware of London. So I guess primarily we are a permaculture designed community garden that was set up at the back of the council house of our co-founder, and it still exists at the back of this council house. So we exist on social housing property and are in the process at the moment of trying to kind of raise the money and the awareness to try and buy this as a community asset, but it is still not a space that we own. but we've been there for about 15 years. And the first 9 years of that was completely unincorporated, informal, a very much like a movement and a kind of grassroots entity that was developed by the people that were benefiting from it. So there wasn't this idea of creating programs and initiatives that you then retrospectively need to try and put loads of effort into doing outreach for. It was created by the people that were running it and benefiting from it. I guess our tagline essentially is reconnecting people with nature for personal, social and economic transformation. And we very much see that as kind of giving people in urban environments, first of all, a much more personal connection to the cause and starting to feel something emotional about it, which can then lead to some sort of collective social behavior, which in turn will then lead to some sort of economic transformation for the people involved. We work mostly with what you might call kind of marginalized communities in the city, and that includes a lot of young refugees and asylum seekers at the moment who are generally unaccompanied minors in the city, which does mean that they often come from places that are a lot more rural and perhaps much more in touch with environmentalism in a way that we might not be, or in a much more practical way. And then they end up in these very urban environments. And so they come to the space almost seeking healing and connection, and actually bring a lot of knowledge to the space that we might not even have. And then we work in general with a lot of local kind of families, low-income families and young people in general. Going and drawing upon the creativity side, we basically have a youth program which won the Team London Award in 2015 for kind of innovative work with young people, and it's called Hip Hop Garden. And that basically looks to fuse popular urban youth culture with the kind of environmental movement as a way of making it interesting, exciting and accessible to young people, to bring them along in a way that again doesn't sort of criticize their way of life and actually tries to find a sense of synergy between the lifestyles that they do lead without kind of judging them for that, and without necessarily constantly having a go at them for being on smartphones or, I don't know, wanting to buy new trainers, but kind of making them see that there might be some of the creativity and the innovation and the ideas generation of something like hip hop that could be brought to the environmental sector. And that's, I'm going to show you a film about that in just a moment. As a very small and local project, and I think one of the terms that I was recently taught by my colleague is local, which might be fitting, which also I think I saw on Hannah's slides, new to me, but essentially that is the point. Like, we have this very localized model that works because it really builds on personal relationship building and community building in a very real sense of that word. But obviously, to have any kind of large impact, we work in partnerships a lot, and we really work to try and spread the methodology and work with projects that are doing either the same thing as us in different places or different things to us. One of the ways in which we've done that recently is that we've launched our own media channel in partnership with a media production company. It's called Untelevised. And the idea of that was literally like, how do we bridge the gap between the people that create media and tell the narratives with the actual grassroots projects and stories that kind of need to be told but are not resourced to tell them. So we've created this media channel. We've been running it for about a couple of years. We started showcasing a lot of grassroots work through this media channel, and just as of this month have won a sort of news and media award, and are going to be working with the Lankelly Chase Foundation here in London to actually expand that channel. So the idea was democratic media. So that's kind of how we like to try and work, is to figure out who's got some of the other skills and the other reach that we don't have, and how do we bridge that. We also try very much to kind of, we do have people in our midst who do have slightly more strategic policy knowledge. My background before I became a co-director was for a while in kind of social policy and in the youth policy team within the Cabinet Office. And so we use the media channel as a way of saying, how do we translate strategy and policy down to the grassroots, but how do we also actually then translate findings from the grassroots up into the kind of policy sphere that it needs to be? And we try and do this with funders that we work with as well, like always influencing them to fund differently, because I think that's actually one of the also really crucial things when a lot of grassroots projects perceive themselves as being in competition for funds. And so recently, we actually applied for the Sustainable Futures Fund by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. And actually one of the things they said to us, we might not fund you because you are so small and local, and we tend to go for much larger infrastructure kind of organizations. And the pitch that we put in, partly saying that we work with young people that come from all over the world. And so actually our knowledge and our reach is kind of by default international. And they did make an exception and fund a kind of small grassroots project for the first time. So this is kind of the way that we are trying to move at the moment. I don't want to talk too long. I just, we have a film which is from our youth program and kind of shows where we try and bridge environmentalism with creativity and kind of local community building, which I'm hoping will work.
Thank you, Mona.
Thank you. Sorry if that was a bit long.
It was worth every moment. There's nothing to add to that. That was incredibly powerful.
Thank you.
So I'm going to hand over to Jane and Susan now.
Okay, so let's start with making a couple of links to the last speakers. Really interested to hear Hannah mention that arts and creativity might well be the route for citizen engagement in relation to the climate emergency, because that's kind of like a nice link to our piece. And also Mona's comment about what they're doing is the right thing to do and that it's an extension of life. So, and I'll make the link there in terms of us being an outfit that very much has play, which is essential to all life, at the centre of our journey. So what I want to start sharing with you here with my colleague Jane is a few slides and a bit of a story about our playful journey as Plymouth Scrap Store. Sorry, we've only just recently changed our name to Plymouth Scrap Store CIC, where affordability and accessibility as our core values. We discovered through our own journey that through our trading, we can link this to a place where people and planet meet. So we wanted to pick up the themes of environment as well. So there's a little picture just to show you who we are. This is our latest look, very flashy design on our van. And really, this is just to set a backdrop to what Jane's going to talk to you about, that we've probably been environmentally conscious without actually knowing how environmentally conscious we have been. And so we just thought we'd mention a few of the government initiatives and target-driven elements that a couple of the speakers have already referred to. So way back in the early 90s, we had a recognition that we needed to cut carbon emissions to save our planet. I remember being around the work in youth and community settings when Local Agenda 21 and the concept of sustainability was kind of first made more popular. And then I came across this guy, Patrick Geddes, who is the first apparently recorded person to have come across this statement, think global, act local, which I know we've referred to already today. The United Nations Millennium Development Goals are paradoxical in themselves. If we think about sustainability and sustainable development, is it possible? And then we go on and we go on, and then we're actually going to be in a situation where we have the G7 Climate Emergency Conference happening in Cornwall very, very soon. So that's the backdrop to the story that we're about to tell. And then this is what happens to us all, isn't it? When we see all that big stuff and we realize what's actually going on out there, we often ask ourselves, what can I actually do? What is the difference that I can make? And I think that the story that Jane is now about to tell you about Plymouth Scrap Store is one of those bits of community-based activity that we can actually all grasp hold of. And it does relate to the bigger theme of environment and low carbon and the other themes of today, resilience definitely. So I will hand over to Jane and she can get us going on our 27-year journey. Thanks, Jane.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It's amazing to be here and quite excited to tell you our story. So, are we, as Plymouth Scrap Store, tackling the environmental challenge? Are we a resilient community business? Well, I guess that's for you to decide. But here's a bit about why we think we just might be. As a community-focused economic actor, what role do we have in building powerful communities? We would like to share with you our best practice from the last 12 months and over the last 27 years, how we have developed from being an association reliant on grants to becoming a trading community interest company based in the heart of a community, offering affordable, accessible, creative and playful resources, employment and volunteering opportunities. How we have unknowingly created aspects of circular economy in what we do, how we see our allies, and actually, are they the same people as those who share our values? So taken from what was then the draft Plymouth Culture Plan, creative education, we know that early childhood experiences and encounters of any kind have a profound effect on future outcomes, none more so than creative and cultural encounters. Here in Plymouth, we want our cultural offer to integrate with our schools and education providers so that every young person has access to art, culture and creativity in the curriculum. Additionally, we want creativity to be embedded in all subjects so that we can develop creative thinkers, agile problem solvers and resilient future leaders. So, do we as part of Plymouth's community really actively create power? Are we really tackling the environmental challenge by saving loveliness from landfill? Well, we're not sure, but this is what we do. We save at least 6,000 bags for life full of stuff from recycling and landfill a year. That's 6,000 bags of creativity that is both affordable and accessible to everyone. We provide 2,000 hours of volunteering. We provide 1,600 hours of paid work. We provide a minimum of 400 social media postings a year, and we network with at least 3 organisations every week. So where did this all start? 27 years of planning, developing, changing and moulding an organisation. What have we learnt? Well, you think that we would be in the perfect place by now, but who knew? And I'm sure that 27 years ago, when we set up the Plymouth Play Association as part of an exit strategy for a government-funded regeneration project that was about getting women back into work through a play and childcare initiative, we didn't think we would still be here. At that time, I was working for Plymouth City Council's now obscure Heritage and Leisure Department with the greatest job title ever. I was the play officer. I was approached by Joy, who was working in a local play scheme and had a kitchen full of Blue Peter style making resources for the scheme that she worked at, as she wanted us to set up a scrap store so that the many play schemes, holiday clubs, after school provision and childcare places had somewhere they could come and buy stuff that was both affordable, accessible and exciting. It was already on our agenda as part of the planned resource centre. We approached Plymouth's Housing and Buildings Department and they found us a garage unit to hire. Today, we are a team of trustees and volunteers with 3 part-time paid posts, a team of volunteers, a bit of admin support paid for, with bigger premises, with storage space and a van and that team to pay for. Our journey has seen us grant funded, taking on service level agreements, working with the local authority on in-kind funded work, and more grant funding. Somewhere along that journey, our service level agreement officer told us that we needed to start thinking about the world in a different way, a world without grant funding and no major project funds either. And what would that look like? And more importantly, with that kind of information, what could we do differently? We analysed our income and realised that membership, hire resources and sales of scrap, yes, we sell the stuff that other people throw away. It might go into recycling, but more often it goes into landfill. And that stuff actually played a really big part in our staying afloat. We were trading. So we started focusing on those areas and soon realised in 2011 that we needed to formalise our business model. We became a CIC, roll forward a few more years, and in 2019, we've become stagnant, stuck in our ways and needing a bit of help. Our friends at Nudge offered to work with us to develop a new workplace, but we weren't ready for that yet. So having been an advocate of Dartington SSE for several years, it felt like serendipity when a new programme appeared. Trade Up. We applied, did 3 interviews, including one where Joy and I introduced our cardboard box to the panel. We were accepted and became part of the 2019 cohort, where we were soon to find our like-minded allies. Part of the offer was a business review meeting with a strong panel made up from economic actors, including the council. So many suggestions we had tried previously that hadn't worked. Why would it work now? So many ideas of ways to change that I knew the trustees wouldn't go for. Then came the pandemic, and all of a sudden those suggestions from the review meeting seemed like really good ideas, and the trustees were up for change. A request for bags of creative, playful resources came in, and using this model, we made up bags for the council, including the youth department. We applied to Armed Forces Covenant to run a creative play for all project. Bags of loveliness distributed to the forces families. We worked in partnership with our local Royal Navy Family Support Unit, and with a COVID-19 risk assessment in place, we sourced, quarantined, made up and prepared bags for them to distribute. We applied for funding from other places, including Active Devon, and from Rio we gained seed funding to secure other funding. We juggled and networked projects together. We applied for and were successful in gaining a Social Enterprise Support Fund grant to deliver a box project. There's a theme here about boxes, you'll see. Boxes full of loose parts were made up to distribute to local childcare, early years and community settings. We applied to Power to Change to support diversity in our volunteer team, enabling our garage project to take on a new life. Rock on 12 months. 5,000 plus bags and boxes later, we have traded and been grant funded in almost equal amounts. Our business plan is almost complete. We are nearly finished looking at our impact monitoring framework, and we've got locality to thank for that. They've helped us to see what's important and how we can measure its impact. We've changed our name to reflect more of what our trading is. We are now, as Susan alluded to, Plymouth Scrap Store CIC. We've given the shop a shake-up. We've worked in collaboration with other like-minded allies across the city, including Precious Plastics Tavistock, as part of an Esme Fairburn-funded learning and collaboration research project with Pop Ideas, and that is now Precious Plastics Plymouth and Tavistock, and is on a Start Something programme of its own with Rio. And with Borrow Don't Buy and Time Bank Southwest, we are working to support the development of repair cafes. We are also part of an eco-collective with Art and Energy, Rebel Botanist, Pollinize and Clean Our Patch. So as you can see, we've worked really hard to embrace change. And now, at least for a while, we will open our doors and let our customers back in. We will trade and collaborate, always keeping our eyes open for opportunities. Why did it work for us this time? Well, we like to think it's because we said yes to things we would have usually turned our backs on, just by approaching it from a different angle. We have realised where our value sits. We have priced ourselves fairly. We worked together. We realised that actually this time we didn't have anything to lose. We upped our risk taking and decided it was all or nothing. So that's a really potted history of what we did and how we got there. And Susan will just sort of wrap us up.
So Jane just talked about the fact that we'd had support work from locality, so very hot off the press. You'll be all delighted to know we're now going to measure what we do in the context of the 5 Rs, the refuse, reduce, reuse, repurpose and recycle. So we are going to measure exactly how much waste we divert or reduce from landfill, our role in raising awareness and education around reuse and recycle. And we would really like to attempt to measure our part in the circular economy. And I think that's a nice link to the brief that we had today. So a couple more pictures you've already seen. And then that's our fabulous bag and box lead worker with lots of them ready to send off in various different directions. And then that's just our thank you to say thanks for listening to our playful journey. And that blue plaque one day you will see in the alternative blue plaque trail that's coming to Plymouth very soon. So thank you very much for giving us the time and space today.
Thank you. That was really, really, really interesting. I have to say, I've got a real fondness for scrap stores, partly since I've become a mum, so like getting things for my kids. But back in the early 90s, I remember driving over the Pennines from Bradford to Manchester scrap store to get loads of like bits of stuff to dress up as like a working men's club for a rave. So that's a little bit of kind of link with culture there that you just reminded me of it. So yeah, brilliant, brilliant work. Thank you. So last but not least, over to you, Thomas.
Thank you very much. And thank you, the City of Plymouth and Ed and Hannah and the team for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to share some of the ideas that are behind Fab City, and hopefully I will be able to illustrate a little bit why we believe it's important. A little bit about me, because I feel like I'm talking with a community that each other more or less. I'm far away. I'm in Indonesia at the moment, but I'm actually from Venezuela. And during the last 15 years, I've been there running Fab Lab Barcelona, which I established in 2007 at the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia, where I also run a program called Master in Design for Emerging Futures. I put together with many people, incredible people, we started the Fab City Global Initiative, and now here in Bali, I'm starting the Meaningful Design Group. And you will see all of them are connected in one way to another. So I wanted to start saying that I believe we are in a very critical moment of convergence, similar maybe to the beginning of the 20th century or probably to the 15th century, where crisis or a kind of a critical change of culture or the way we perceive the world happens at the same time that it's a big technological advancement happens, right? At the moment, our crises are multiple. It's not only one. There are some that are more, obvious, others that probably we did not expect it, and others that are, we know very well, and we are not doing anything about them, right? Like the climate crisis. The influence, especially in this last crisis, it has something that is transforming the way in which we might understand we intervene in the world. And what I mean is that, from this graph, there's a very clear explanation that there are things that change very slow and there are things that change very fast. Nature used to change very slow, and things that we were predicted to change, we were able to predict the changes of nature. We invented things like agriculture. But then fashion is something that changed very fast. What's happening with the influence of humankind in the planet is that we are making nature to change as fast as fashion. Therefore, we need to be more resilient for those transformations, right? And the way in which digital technologies, for instance, are transforming, infrastructure or governance is also producing changes that are, more difficult to be anticipated. And you call it now, like more recently, the global pandemic has changed everything just almost at once. So we need to be more resilient because things are changing faster. At the same time, technologies are converging as well. Some of them that you might hear more often as buzzwords like artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, blockchain most recently, and all the crypto fever that is happening at the moment. Are also happening at the same time in which we have all these crises as well, and we are not including yet, or there's something that is like a little tsunami coming, which is all the biotechnology revolution that is is probably turning humans into gods, being able to manipulate life. So what changes, the difference between this moment of convergence and other moments, as I said before, the beginning of the 20th century and the introduction of the assembly line or the oil as a base of the base of all the energy, a lot of energy produced in the world, or material ecology, is in my opinion, the access to knowledge and the access to tools. These principles of access to knowledge and access to tools, it was something reflected in Stuart Brands and other colleagues, the holders, the Whole Earth Catalog, which was a publication that started in the 60s. It was documenting open source, instructions to be more resilient. That's kind of the pre-internet open source sharing of knowledge about how to set up your photovoltaic panel in the backyard, to how to cultivate potatoes, etc., right? There's other different conditions in which this kind of power of resilience emerges, and this is a couple of publications that happened in the Cuba, in the post, after the fall of the Soviet Union. Cuba, the Cuban population had to really invent and be very resilient, because all the supplies were coming from the Soviet Union, and then you started to see what happens is that the population started to innovate and how to replace batteries, how to turn the motors of washing machines into fans, because it's very hot in Cuba, right? And all of this was documented in these two books that you can find now, thanks to an artist called Ernesto Orosa, that are called With Our Own Efforts, or the Book of a Family, in which there is just recipes in order to be resilient in the post-Soviet Cuba. So the kind of tools that we have now are a bit different, right? So all that knowledge that that you used to have in a physical book, now you can have it in your hand with a super powerful computer that is hyper connected, and that turns us these are not only tools to consume information, but actually to produce information, ideally beyond Instagram, and they look like this, like 70 years ago. So this is how your phone looked like, just a little bit over half a century ago. This is how the future of fabrication looks today. And we need to think about how it's going to look in the next, 10, 30, or 50 years, right? Right now, Fab Labs are these clunky spaces with machines that are noisy, that make things that they don't look perfect as the industry would produce it. But they're great places to learn how things are made, to share knowledge, and to make things, as long as you are good on changing the aesthetics of things and not trying to replicate the industry as it is. And more importantly, it's not about only your place, but it's a network that is highly connected. Since we opened Fab Lab Barcelona in 2007, and it was like there were like 10 Fab Labs in the world by the moment. Right now, there are over 2,000 Fab Labs in the world. All these Fab Labs, they share more or less the same equipment, which is kind of a playing football, right? Or you have certain rules, and you have a certain amount of people playing in the field, and everybody knows how to play football. So this is very similar. But what is the added interest on this is that you can go in the most southern Fab Lab here in Puerto Williams in Chile, and you can design something and ship it to the north of China. This is not North Korea, right? No, it's the north of China. And you can share a file of how a thing is made, and the thing can be replicated in the other side of the world without having to put it in a shipping container, ideally, right? And this happens in some different levels within the Fab Lab network. There are most of the Fab Labs are concentrated in Europe and in the global north, and just maybe 30% or maybe less are located in the global south. It's something I think that I will tap into, because there is some of these north-south dependencies, which usually we don't consider when thinking about the materials in which we are depending upon. We think about local production only in terms of manufacturing local things, but then we're depending on supply chains that come from colonial relationships or extractive relationships that come from the past. So Fab Labs have the potential to transform the way we make things and the way we prototype, but for me it's more important the way we learn, right? And basically they started out of a class. This is the How to Make Almost Anything class, has been taught by Professor Neil Gershenfeld since the beginning of this millennia, and let's put it like that. And in order to go to this class, you have to be an MIT student, which is very expensive. And you have to be very brave actually to graduate from MIT. It's a lot of, if you go to the hallways of MIT, you will see a lot of notes of psychological support for students. The difficulty of studying in such a demanding school. But then what we have been trying to do is to make the idea of going to MIT to learn about digital fabrication obsolete. Because when we have a distributed network of Fab Labs, we can turn it in a distributed campus where people can learn in their lab, but also can learn from the same professor that teaches at MIT. This is Neil Gershenfeld teaching a class to over 70 Fab Labs in the world on how to make almost anything, as if they are MIT students. We have graduated over 3,000 people. They develop projects that are trying to change the way we produce food, the way we monitor our environment, the way we develop tools for farmers to be more competitive and use technology to automate certain processes that are very annoying for small farmers especially, and to promote farming as something that as a diversified micro farms instead of like a long uses of land for monoculture. Projects that are based on using open source tools to monitor the environment in the city. This is a project I've been personally involved. You can check, there was a BBC feature. I can share some links afterwards in the chat of things I have been mentioning. But there's a small feature on the BBC that came to Barcelona and recorded how we use these sensors in order for our neighbors to fight against the noise produced by drunken people in a plaza, causing for kids and elderly not being able to sleep, which creates sleep deprivation, which influence the way they learn, and so on and so on. To beehives, again, following the same open source principles, trying to stimulate people to produce their own beehives in order to have their own bee colonies. Bees are very good for the environment, especially for ecosystems, and keep the richness of ecosystems. But also we, together with a team in the United States, we contributed to the development of tools to monitor the health of the bees inside the hive using sound frequencies, to projects that, going through a different scale, not just objects, but we were able to design an entire restaurant and make it an open source. So basically you go to the restaurant and can download the furniture or send it to the other side of the world to replicate it, or use the waste of the restaurant to develop new materials in order to make leather, and turn your lab into more like a kitchen in which you can develop your own bioplastics. These are very small examples. I know this is tiny in comparison with the force of places like Amazon. But I've seen, as I said before, I've seen the labs, the Fab Lab network growing from being only 10 labs in the world to be over 2,000 in these last 15 years. And this opened an opportunity to think about design as something that happens in an open way against the whole idea of intellectual property and patenting. That happens distributed against the idea of having production and where labor is cheap and where materials are cheap, and circular design, thinking about how we can recirculate all the materials that are produced in a city into the production streams, right? I want to be very fast because I think like I have a couple of minutes left and I want to reach to Fab City, but basically changing this paradigm is fundamental in order to think about the future of urbanization as something more productive, to evolve this idea of producing stock, keeping the same again extractive principles of the colonial times, in which you want to control the magic formula or a magic resource that is in a magic island, like at the north of Indonesia, for instance, when nutmeg was the thing that everybody wanted to control. The Dutch and the British were fighting against for the control of it. And then you guaranteeing that control will give you like an advantage in the market, right? That's what is behind this model. This is the same principles that are now based in our industrial society, which is the principle of the winner that takes it all. The principles of creating stock because the higher volume of production, the cheaper the prices, and then you could create false necessities for people to buy things that they actually don't need. So it's all attached and all connected. And then we started to imagine, as I said before, this idea of how design could be different, how people share the recipes of designs instead of moving. You don't ship pizzas from Napoli to the world. You share the recipes, and you have the infrastructure and the materials to make pizzas locally. Saying let's not just replicate what I'm saying here is not to turn Fab Labs into microfactories, but it's like to use them as a catalyst to think about how local production can look like at the regional level and at the metropolitan level. And we learn a lot from this platform that we are running now. We inherited from a team from Scotland. It's called MakeWorks, which try to map all the, the capacities for manufacturing that happen in a region. And then basically becomes a way to connect to the culture of manufacturing in that place, to connect with people, to connect designers that prototype things in Fab Labs or maker spaces on the university to the possibility of doing local production with local materials. This is kind of a provocation to, for us to think about what is the infrastructure that we need for the 21st century. We have been investing in roads, and trains, railways, airports, especially in Spain. There are like a lot of unused airports. It's really stupid. We keep like investing in infrastructure to move atoms around the world. And then the provocation that we're doing here is that how we think about the infrastructure that we need for the 21st century, which is how we move. Okay, so I have time. So how we move, thank you, Ed. How we move from investing in infrastructure to transport materials around the world, to think about the infrastructure that we need in cities in our bioregions. Actually, I love the reference to Patrick Geddes, because it's kind of one of the intellectual fathers of bioregionalism. How to think about infrastructure that keeps materials circulating locally and keeps information circulating globally, right? Very different from, again, railways, from airports and from ports. So this leads us to cities, right? Cities and bioregions, I would say. But basically, our question, out of nurturing the growth of this Fab Lab network by developing educational programs, by supporting some of the innovations that come of the network, is how we can think bigger and imagine the kind of transformations that could happen at the city and regional level when we really support this kind of, all this has been happening with kind of ad hoc, or kind of a own investment of organizations and time, like in some cases support of certain governments in some public Fab Labs in the world, but mainly it's kind of a private initiatives. And now it's starting to be part of some programs, even in the European Union, with some of the projects that we run. But the whole idea here is like the thinking about a productive urbanization based on the principle of resilience. And resilience is increased when you have the means of production. And having the means of production, it means the infrastructure, but also it means the knowledge to the means of production. And in one hand, we have vast access to knowledge that we misuse. Again, we probably use like a very small percentage of the computing power of our funds. And in the other hand, we're putting the money of infrastructure in the wrong places, in my opinion, again. So in order to provoke this conversation, we launched Fab City as a new paradigm for productive cities. And this almost said something unintended. We were seeing the Fab Lab network growing. We see the potential for Fab Labs to change this paradigm, as Anna was mentioning, from going to cities that they are depending on what they import, right, from all around the world, and the only thing that they produce is trash, to thinking about the cities that they keep the material circulating locally, and data circulates globally. So in 2014, we convinced by the time mayor of Barcelona that this was a great idea. And he accepted to make, in a public event that was the Global Fab Lab gathering, he made a speech, and at the end of the speech, he pressed a button and started a countdown of 40 years for Barcelona to produce almost everything it consumes. And that clock keeps ticking. If you go to the Fab City website, you will see it. But what led after that commitment is that we convinced also the mayor to invest in a public infrastructure and think about Fab Labs as the new libraries for cities. Luckily, we managed not only to work with that mayor, but with the political affiliation, and the plan keeps going. So there are already like 5 public Fab Labs in Barcelona. So I want to keep going, and not only Fab Labs. One of the key things is like this is not only about Fab Labs or maker spaces, but also thinking about the other, the purple dots are the private initiatives related with digital fabrication that happens in Barcelona. The green ones are the public Fab Labs, but there are other initiatives that are related with industry in terms of advanced manufacturing and new modes of production. This is what the clock I was mentioning, but again, you could see it live in the Fab City website. Just finishing in the next couple of minutes that I have, this initial provocation from the mayor of Barcelona became as a global network as well. What we were surprised is like after Barcelona launched this initiative, we had the request from the city of Boston, the city of Ekurhuleni and Shenzhen to say, hey, we want to be part of Fab City. And we say, well, we're still figuring it out, but fine, you can join. And that's how it started somehow, right? We didn't plan to, okay, let's make a Fab City and let's create a network of cities. It was actually something that just emerged. And it's not something to intend to make cities to follow something, but actually to become part of something and understand that whatever they're doing locally, it contributes to the local discourse. Even if they are a big city, you are going to be inspiring all the cities that are part of this network. So right now there are 38 cities. And I give you a couple of examples just to finish. In Paris, apart from organizing the Global Fab City Summit a couple of years ago and convincing the mayor of the city, the local Fab City Association, they managed to get this large, all industrial building, and they're turning into a library of materials in which they're aiming to use waste coming mainly from the events that Paris hosts. There is a lot. And then classify and document that waste and turning that as the source materials that designers can use in order to make new products, right? And that's one of the core projects of the Fab City Grand Paris, but also they have been doing different analysis to the city of Paris to work in different areas of the city to enable circular production projects. This is the city of Sao Paulo, which following the inspiration from Barcelona, created a public network of 12 Fab Labs. That's kind of a new type of a public service. And most of them located in the favelas, near like where the most needed communities are. This is in Seoul, Korea, where there is the Seoul Innovation Fab Lab. There is the one in the north, but they're working, believe it or not, it's in Korean, but I can translate for you. Not because I understand it, but because I know the project is, they're working on developing a super kind of a micro factory, which is a complementary infrastructure for Fab Labs, also based on advanced manufacturing. And for instance, in Puebla, in Mexico, the team is working with the local university and the local government in the recovery of a central area of the city in which they want to create a program of connecting the craftsmanship with new digital technologies as a kind of a new economic motor for the existing artisans to upgrade themselves with new skills, but also to put it in evidence in a space, in an area of the city. So this is an evolution from the full stack that Hannah showed at the beginning. We're still working on it. It looks a little bit more with higher resolution. We're changing the name from full stack, which is very techy, very geeky, and call it strata, with something that you can relate with geologics, or you can relate it also to lasagna. But basically it's trying to understand how all these steps of creating a distributed infrastructure, supporting learning, supporting innovation, deploying innovations into territories, coordinating with communities, thinking about the bioregional implications of that, again, reference to Patrick Guedes, and then sharing knowledge globally can be a way in which we can operationalize or make operational this whole Fab City global initiative. I want to finish by inviting you to read more. Online, you can find our book. It's free to read it online. And you can also order. It's print on demand, of course. We don't have stock. And if you are more curious to get to know more about what we're doing in our programs and our projects, you can check either the IAC the Fab Lab Barcelona website or the whole Fab City Global Initiative website. Thank you very much. Yeah, 3 minutes more. So thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. I was expecting to hand over to Ed. Are you there, Ed? Okay, fine. Then I won't. That was really, really interesting. And I know that one of the questions that came up was a very practical one about how people find their own scrap stores in places. Is there a directory anywhere? Jane or Susan?
Yes, there is. If people are interested in finding scrap stores near them, then Google something called the Reuseful UK website, and they have a directory of all, or just, oh, Susan put it in chat. Yay! Or contact us. Love to help out anybody who wants to set one up, actually. Quick plug for more scrap stores.
Thank you, Jane. And I presume there's a similar thing as well, Thomas. I think you alluded it to in your slides, where people can look for Fab Labs in the UK and beyond.
Yeah, I'm sharing the link to the Fab Lab platform. It's where the maps I showed come from. With basically, yeah, show Fab Labs per country, per city. You can do a search and you will find it.
Lovely, thank you. And just to say that we'll be sharing a recording of this, but also the slides and the film that Mona showed as well. So people will be able to look at those again in their own time. So now Ed's just texted me to say he's trying to get back in, which is nice. But we're going to hand over to a breakout room anyway. So the idea of these is for you all to go into 4 separate groups, ably facilitated by Nick, Gareth, Michelle and Tom. So you can kind of talk about like how things resonated with you, some questions that you might have, and then so you can come back with some questions that will be compiled by a facilitator, and we can put those to the speakers before we finish. So I'll hand you over to Ruby now, pop you all in breakout rooms, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, everybody. And thanks to the speakers.
Sorry for my group, got cut off in mid-flow.
Well, you don't seem to be beavering away really, really well. There's so much stuff there. It's quite a lot to work with through. I think that's one of the most comments and questions that we've had. Thank you all for all your hard work and for all those interesting ideas. Really great. And sorry I lost you all a moment back there. My internet fell over at just the right point, but we're back. So we've got time for a few questions that we're going to put to our speakers, and let's sort of kick off with that. I thought there was a really great sort of comment that just leapt out to me from the breakout rooms. You know, grassroots doesn't mean low impact or limited reach. And I suppose I'm really interested in how that we get this fantastic activity that is both environmental, social and economically inclusive really to scale. And I know, Thomas, I think you can speak to this, and Hannah, you talked about this in your presentation. This is the idea of a sort of full stack model to make change in a place and to create scale. I wondered if either of you could tell us a little bit more about that. Explain what that is.
Sure. Well, the full stack, which we're changing to the strata slightly. Making it less geeky and a bit more. I was saying that this is more like a geological term, but also you can use it to refer to lasagna. It's kind of at the different layers. It's aimed to be or it's intended to be an operative plan to accomplish this kind of a very large vision of, you know, making cities to produce almost everything they consume locally by 2054. When you say that, it's like a okay, and how this is going to happen? Well, there is like, okay, so what? So the full stack is basically a multi-scalar but also complementary set of layers that are aimed to operate first of all at the hyperlocal level. I'm thinking, you know, we refer to Fab Labs as an example. And maybe I use that to illustrate the different layers. The first one is a distributed infrastructure. I show how Fab Labs operate as a distributed infrastructure where people can go use machines, learn how to make with them, etc. Then on top of that infrastructure, you need to support programs for skills and to create the skills and the capabilities in order not only to operate the machines, but to make things with the machines, right? To innovate with the machines. So it's infrastructure, learning, innovating. You know, once people acquire the skills, they are able to create, you know, not only replicate products that exist, but also start to create alternative models of producing food, cheaper solutions to create open source machines itself, so that you can transform your own tools. So it's innovation. Then the next layer is how that innovation lands into territories, and that could be neighborhoods, communities, could be small towns, etc. Which lands to the next layer, which kind of existing communities you connect with. And then the next layer on top of that is to understand how all this process happen following bioregional principles. It means like understanding the resources around the, we call it the bioregion, but it could be a territory that could be smaller or larger than a bioregion. And then finally, how all of this is connected to a global network, right? So you go from a space that it could be a fab lab to transforming individuals' lives, to working with territories and communities, to enter into bioregional logics, and then to share it with a global network, back and forward, meaning that you can learn, but also you can share knowledge with this network. So that's how we believe we could make this super grand, crazy vision operative. And we're working on developing, actually, we have the global Fab Lab network. We have already programs that operate on top of this network. Some projects that I showed, but now we're developing programs that are more specifically intended to train people that will support the Fab City development in the following years to come.
Okay, thank you. So something about a sort of holistic approach to creating change on a variety of different levels, and things like, you know, creativity and entrepreneurial thinking and community are all really important parts of that. And I think that's really useful to see how some of these presentations are really linked together, and it's really important to sort of create a wider change. Francis, do you have a question?
Yeah, so the one I picked up on the film, Mona, that you showed, that, you know, storytelling and film is a really good way to sort of spread the word about things that are happening and really resonates with people and shows our connectedness. And I was really interested in the untelevised you know, platform that you've started. So I wondered if you could just give a little bit of a sort of background to how that came up, and then just reflect on other ways that have kind of resonated with people of communicating your work.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, but so my Zoom is doing something really strange. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, fine. Yeah, so, you know, we met, there's a media company called Philanthropy, and actually it was set up by a young girl, a young Black girl, when she was only like sort of 24 years old. She set it up herself, partly also in response to the kind of lack of diverse storytelling in the mainstream media. She had spent some time in places like the BBC and Channel 4 and whatever, but so she set up her own media production company. We were just talking about monetizing in our session. She was also ended up having to do quite a lot of commissioned pieces, you know, in order to just kind of make the money, but had always wanted to, you know, to tell stories that were more personal to her and political. And we met because she came to do a film for us. She also is the one who produced the film I showed you guys today. And it was kind of through that discussion, you know, me and her were like saying, okay, so you have the media skills, we have these stories. We were doing a radio show at the time at May Project Gardens, but, you know, I wanted to expand that into much more multimedia. And so essentially, you know, it kind of began that way. We were like, let's pool together that resource. And it very much was a kind of voluntary add-on to each of our companies. And then, you know, we slowly managed to just kind of do it underneath the hours or the wage that we may have been earning in our own companies anyway. But we sort of used it as a way of going out and platforming. So we would have other, you know, we had, for example, a project in London called Granville Community Kitchen, who are also a kind of grassroots kind of food distribution project. and they were at risk of losing their premises, and said to us, would you follow us, and would you, you know, film and kind of document the process of us possibly using our premises? So we kind of were going out and doing that, you know, if people requested that. We very much wanted to show, and I know this is another theme that's been a bit, you know, topical today, is we wanted to show projects that were essentially running outside of our mainstream infrastructure and were often having to pick up on crucial statutory, what should be crucial statutory services. So that was kind of one of the angles we took, was, you know, who are the really hidden people, the untelevised people, essentially, that are kind of like picking up on services that should be provided by the state. So that was the angle, and like I said, you know, it's been 2 years now, and we have only just now like actually gotten some funding for it specifically, and have kind of been taken into this news and media collective that's been set up by the Kelly Chase Foundation. So it's quite early days, but we're quite ambitious with it. Like, one thing we always do, and we have a podcast that goes with it, which I'll share as well, but one thing we always do is we produce resources that go with whatever themes we've covered. So if, for example, we cover a project that might be losing their premises, we actually share like toolkits and resources on how people can fight for their premises, or to housing lawyers, or, you know, we sort of try and always add like an element of like action with it, so it's not just storytelling. I mean, there's nothing wrong with storytelling, but we sort of try and embed it in something that people can take away. So even our podcast will always have a kind of a learn section where we break down certain words and concepts and things. We then discuss the subject, and then there's always a section at the end, which is, now what can you do? Like, where are the places you could go and sign up or donate or so on. So that's very much how we wanted it to be, to have that action element in it.
Thank you. That's really, really interesting. I'm just thinking about how other people could use those resources as well. It's really, yeah, because they'd be relevant for anybody, anywhere. So that's great that you could share.
They're on our website. They're on our media. I'll share them, actually. I'll share it all here in the chat. The resources, we've set up a website especially to host some of these things. So and hopefully now with some funding, there probably will be some more.
That's great. Thank you, Mona. And Jane and Susan, just thinking about the scrap store, I imagine a lot of the work that you do is word of mouth. You know, people come to you because other people have talked about it, but are there other avenues that you use, or other organisations that you work with to kind of promote what you're doing?
Okay, I'm guessing Susan's probably there somewhere, but just in case she isn't. Yeah, we're just part of a larger collaboration, I think, in Plymouth, of very like-minded people. So we have Borrow Don't Buy, and we have the repair cafes, and we have people doing fashion fixing, and it all sort of comes out by, as you say, word of mouth. Schools use us, artists and others use us, but still after this length of time, we still have people rocking up on a weekly basis saying, didn't know you were here, didn't know it was for us, didn't know that we could use it. So we're trying all the time to sort of spread the word and to get into different avenues and make sure that, yeah, that people know about us and that they know we are for everyone, that everybody can use us. And change that ethos around, you know, the whole thing about recycling, refusing, reusing, and just showing people that you do what you can. You know, we don't all have to aim really, really high. We can just do what we can all the time to make it happen.
Yeah, thank you. Susan, did you want to add anything?
I would only say that we have a Facebook page, which seems to work for us. And we've recently gone right back to basics and had some postcards produced. And we have little articles in various, like Alan's Stonehouse Voice and other places. The local Plymouth Shopper, which I've forgotten what it's called now, the Chronicle. So we use, I mean, the question was about communication and publicity. I don't think we stick to one traditional method or one modern method either. I think we have to be totally varied in the way that we spread the word about scrap stores. We're also part of a national, which we put in the chat box, the Reuseful movement. So it's been part of a movement, to be honest, as much as being a thing that you advertise. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Thank you. And Hannah, just thinking about the broader sort of strategy, the Plymouth culture strategy, how much of that is embedded within it about all the local connections and sort of promoting them?
Yeah, I mean, it's intrinsic to what we've written there, and I think the key point is I think society has become obsessed with scale and growth, and actually what we're talking about here is not about making things scalable, but making them replicable. So actually, you know, it isn't about growing one single thing that operates across the whole city or across the whole of the country, but actually, how do we, through generosity and genuine collaboration, allow lots of things to set up based on best practice and sharing? And Mona was just talking about toolkits and allowing other people to do it. And I think that's the shift that needs to be seen. And so the culture strategy talks really about, we have pockets of best practice in our city. So how do we replicate those? How do we move them across the city? How do we understand that maybe someone else has the power and their expertise and it doesn't sit in normal common places, and actually to allow that expertise to guide activity in other places across the city? And I think, you know, the Fab Labs and Fab City movement is not about scale, it's about replicability, and that's I think central to how we want to move forward as a city.
Thank you. And I'm aware that Ed's been kicked out again, so I'm just going to keep going. My other question was about political education more broadly. So I think what we had in the first session around the state of work, and then the second one about the state of places and spaces leading up to this, is that you can't, and I think, Mona, you've alluded to this in the kind of material that you sort of share in the podcast, and the practical aspect of that is that you can't really talk about, you can talk about things in a very gentle way about reuse or about, you know, kind of fabrication or growing or that kind of thing, but actually at the heart of it there's something about people taking back this economic democracy. So in the state of work we talked about how new unions are organising people in a way that kind of starts to show the inequities of the world, as well as being able to show what the positive future is. And just it's kind of like, how do you manage to do that in a way that doesn't alienate people so they think it's too political, but actually it's really important that people do understand that in a situation we're in, where we need to kind of accelerate what is happening because of the climate emergency and the inequity kind of emergency. So I suppose my question is around political education and how much you kind of frame it as such. Mona, maybe you could kick off.
Yes, I mean, this is a really big part of what we're trying to do, and very much trying to kind of simplify it, or at the very least just make politics seem like something, again, that is very normal. And because it is, I mean, like, I think that it's not this separate thing to our lives, it is everything in our lives, and actually maybe breaking down the idea that it's like a very academic discipline, and, you know, and so on, and finding, again, people's entry point to it. So what is it that they happen to be passionate about anyway? Like, if it is art, well, then you start from there, and you might get into the fact that, I don't know, why are the arts not funded in schools, or whatever it might be. You know, you kind of find out what is the way that somebody's going to engage with it. So one of the things we do with the media channel is we literally do these little, like, 1 minute, partly because Instagram, again, is that's one of the things you can do with Instagram, is these 1 minute videos where we literally just, like, define words. So we might take a really commonly used political term and we break it down and we explain it. And that might be everything from, like, we might define statutory. So do people even know what something, if we're talking about statutory services, do young people know what that means? Or do even people in our own, like, do people realize there's a difference between when they come and get food from a grassroots project versus maybe if they were to get, like, free school meals at school? Like, do they understand that that's not coming from the same place or the same money or the same intention or whatever? So we break down words. We try and kind of produce everything in quite a lot of multimedia forms. So an article, a video, a podcast, etc., etc. So we sort of try and do that. And yeah, I mean, with the young people on our programs through May Project Gardens, again, it's very much about finding out kind of what it is that is their entry point to a subject, and kind of doing it that way. And so like during lockdown, we were approached by Economy, an organization called Economy Asks, and they teach economics. They sort of try and make economics more accessible to people, right? And they came to us and said, would some of your young people like to write articles for us about their experiences as young refugees or asylum seekers? And so again, what we did was, you know, that young person, well, they probably do understand how political their life is, but they might not fully, right? So then they just wrote, each of them maybe an article about, one of them just literally wrote about how little money he gets as an asylum seeker on, you know, that he has no recourse to public funds, you know, you can't work. So he just talked about that. And then that was shared through Economy as an article written by this, well, he spoke it to me and I transcribed it, for example. So they allowed him to tell that story. And that explains in really simple terms to people like how difficult financially it really is to be an asylum seeker, for example. So again, like in a very accessible form. And we had this discussion when Economy came forward. We were like, it's great that you want to include them and it's youth-led and it's whatever, but he can't write English very well. Like, are you happy for it to be spoken and someone to transcribe it? Are you happy they wanted to pay him? Are you happy to pay it to us and we might have to give it to him as volunteer expenses because he's not allowed to earn any money? So there's a lot of ways in which we have that, like, those are some of the discussions we have to have with people when they come forward and they want to make something youth-led or make something grassroots, just to kind of understand some of the challenges that is also involved in doing that. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just finally, maybe Thomas, if I can ask you the same question, bearing in mind that the Barcelona kind of setting and the whole kind of more political situation and that context.
I'm smiling because it was part of our conversation we had in the breakout room, and I expressed a lot of like a very maybe not politically correct political positions, but I would say that one of the things that is certain is that what we're doing is in one way or another political education, right? It's like we are really telling people to change the way in which they see the world as it is, and we're trying to shift the narrative. And one of the things that is important, in my opinion, is to understand that there are possibilities of do things differently. It's just basically that we're just kind of locking ourselves in understanding that the world is as it is, right? The personal kind of a part is that I am from Venezuela, therefore I'm trying to affiliate myself as less as possible with any political party. I suffered a big disappointment in Venezuela in the past. And also I had a lot of experience of working closely with politicians in Barcelona. And one of the things I mentioned is that it doesn't change very much from a very conservative, like from the two extremes. I managed to work with the two extremes in Barcelona. And what happens is that the machine of the council stays the same, and then the whole political game is very distant from what people need and what they need to do and what they need. I don't know. It's kind of a. I don't think that, in my opinion, like maybe. I don't know how to say in English, but this kind of a political side of education in which you involve political parties at this moment, or political ideologies, lacks of legitimacy. And that's very strong position, but it's what I believe. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really, really relevant and quite a nice way for me to wrap up using Ed's notes, so bear with me because he's not going to be able to join us again. So I just wanted to say a massive thank you to our 5 speakers today. I really, really enjoyed this session. Every week it's just brilliant to spend these 2 hours. And thank you also to Ruby and Amy for doing the backroom tech, and to Tom and Gareth, Michelle and Nick for doing the facilitation. So next week, no, not next week, we've got a break. So in a fortnight's time, We'll be starting at the same time at 2 o'clock, so that's on the Tuesday, the 18th of May. And this is a slightly extended session running till 5 o'clock. So not only do we want to draw on all the new municipalist ideas that we've explored together and introduce further ideas such as the feminisation of politics, but we also want to ask about what to do next and you know, how do we take this further. So this week's the local election week in the UK, and many of the more developed municipalist movements have taken the bigger step of developing political platforms and standing municipalist candidates. So on one hand, there's a clear route to community power, but on the other is this a distraction from building economic power and democracy? So we'll be aiming to cover some of those questions. And so to help us with that, we're going to be joined by some more international friends. We've got Tobile Chittenden from the Makers Valley Partnership in Johannesburg, Elena Tarifa from Barcelona on Camus, Kali Akuno from Cooperation Jackson, and Matthew Thompson from Liverpool University. And so we might also be joined with some other people, but we really, really hope that you can join us then, and we'll really look forward to seeing you. So thank you everybody for another great session. See you all later. Cheers.
Bye. Thank you.